Everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to the MTG Arena set review for Ravnica Allegiance. Today it's time to talk about the second part of the red cards. Before we get started, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications to not miss out on the rest of the series. So let's get started. Okay, first off we have Immolation Shaman. So this is basically a bad Harsh Mentor, and Harsh Mentor was already only decent in mono red, and this is much worse. First of all, it only deals half the damage for an activated ability, making it much more manageable for the opponent. And also it's a 1/3 instead of a 2/2, making it a much worse offensive body. The fact that you can turn it into a 4/6 ManuS for 5 mana until end of turn is also pretty negligible in constructed, so this is way too weak in constructed. And in limited even it's not exciting. Like, it's an okay 2-drop, but pretty underwhelming, like worse than a lot of good commons even. Next we have Light Up the Stage. That's a pretty powerful card. This is definitely going to be a potential powerhouse in standard and mono red decks. The important part here is that it is until the end of your next turn, so this usually equals 1 red, draw 2 cards in a red aggressive deck with a bunch of burn spells and stuff. And yeah, this could even be good enough to make it outside of standard. Not quite sure if there is any deck in modern that would want it. Like, I think burn has enough good burn spells that it probably doesn't want to spend the mana on this, but I could be wrong. This could even be good in mono red, since it is a bit similar to the old like Treasure Cruise burn decks. This is obviously slightly worse than Treasure Cruise, but is also a lot easier to support than Treasure Cruise, so it is possible that mono red in modern like Boros burn wants this card, but I'm not 100% sure, since it also already gets Cure the Critics, which is a great addition, and then I'm not sure if you want to give up on burn spells to play this. But yeah, really powerful card. In limited, it's probably a bit less good, but still pretty solid. Like, if you hit a land and a spell off of this, you can easily get to draw 2 cards for 1 red, which is really strong. So even in limited, this seems like a very solid card at the very least. Next we have Mirror March. It's a 6 mana enchantment, and when a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you flip a coin. Until you lose a flip, for each flip you won, create a token that's a copy of that creature. Those tokens gain haste. So yeah, on average you obviously get to copy your creature once or every other turn, every other time basically, and you have the high roll chance to just kind of steamroll the opponent. Seems not like a card you want in constructed, but in limited this could be potentially pretty powerful, but the fact that it costs 6 doesn't impact the board, and then you need good enough creatures to follow it up, is quite a bunch to ask for. So not sure if it's quite playable, but I could see it being kind of a high rolly finisher type thing in certain decks. So definitely something worth at least messing around with in limited. Next we have Rixmadi Reveler, sort of the red 2 mana saga. I forgot the name. Flames of Kelt. Flames of Kelt as a body in Rakdos. So if you're in Rakdos, this seems like a great addition. It's either a 2 mana 2/2 that lets you reverse loot, or if you have no card in hand and you can't spectacle it, it still just is a 2 mana 2/2 that draws you a card. And if you have a way to enable spectacle, it's just a 4 mana 2/2 that draws you 3 cards after you discarded the rest of your hand. So yeah, pretty powerful reload mechanic in Rakdos type aggressive decks, in standard, and in limited in the more aggressive decks. This seems really powerful, and even in not so aggressive decks it seems very solid, so this should usually make your deck either way. Yeah, then we have Rubble Reading. yeah, land destruction, not great in limited. 4-cost land destruction that has Cry 2 is definitely a bit better than usual, but it's still not something that I want in my deck, and also not a constructed card. Next we have Rubblebelt Recluse, a 5-mana 6/5 that attacks each turn, if able. All in all, a pretty good deal, I would say. A 6/5 for 5 in red is a really good raid, and the fact that it has to attack each turn isn't that big of a deal, because that's what you would want to be doing most of the time anyway, and it's also big enough that it shouldn't run into something that eats it for free, like smaller creatures that have to attack. Next we have Rumbling Ruin, 6-mana 6/6. When it enters the battlefield, count the number of +1/+1 counters on creatures you control. Creatures your opponents control with power less than or equal to the number can't block this turn. That's a really weird and long wording, instead of just saying like, creatures your opponents control with power less than or equal to the number of +1/+1 counters on creatures you control can't block this turn. But yeah, in a Gruul deck with a bunch of Riot and other ways to have counters, this seems like a potentially super powerful finisher, and a 6-mana 6/6 is also not bad by any means in limited, so seems like a pretty good top end for a bit bigger proactive Gruul deck in limited, but not a constructed card. Next we have Scorchmark, basically an overcasted bad Magma Spray. Magma Spray for 2 mana, so I don't see this in constructed at all, but in limited 2 mana instant that deals 2 and exiles is still a decent card and will make your deck more often than not, I would assume. Then we have Skagen Hellkite. That's a more interesting card for constructed. Seems like a pretty good card in standard. You either get a 4/4 haste flying or a 5/5 flying without haste, and a decent ability if you decide to go for the +1/+1 counter. You can spend 4 mana to deal 2 damage divided as you choose, as often as you can afford to. So yeah, this is a pretty nice aggressive 5-drop for like a bigger mid-rangey Gruul type deck, Riot themed deck. And in the stall, the ability can also come in really handy, either crippling the opposing board or dealing damage to them while holding the opponent off. But there's a bunch of good red or red-green 5-drops in the format, so it has quite a bunch of competition. In limited, this is obviously a bomb. Next we have Skewer the Critics, another card that is going to be pretty good in standard, getting more cheap deal 3 damage burn, basically a Volcanic Axe for 1, since enabling Spectacle is not that big of a deal usually for red decks. The only downside is that unlike a Volcanic Hammer, that's what I meant, Volcanic Hammer, not Volcanic Axe. Unlike Volcanic Hammer, you can usually only use this after combat to kill something, so it's kind of awkward to kill a blocker with this, because then it's more expensive than Volcanic Hammer. But still a pretty strong card and a great raid in standard, especially given how many cheap DL3 cards we already have, so seems a bit surprising that they would print more like this. And this is even pretty good in Modern. I think this will be an easy 4-off inclusion in Modern Burn, making the deck quite a bit more consistent and faster, and the deck should have no issues at all to enable this. And yeah, the deck just wants as many 1-mana deal 3 as it can, and this is a great option here. And yeah, in limited, even 3-mana deal 3 as a sorcery is totally fine, and if you sometimes can play it for 1, even better. So good card in all relevant scenarios, basically. Next we have Smeltwort Ignis, a 2-mana 2/1, and you can sacrifice it to gain control of target creature with power 3 or less. Basically an act of treason effect on a creature with power 3 or less, once you don't need this anymore. Seems like a pretty solid 2-drop in limited, and yeah, you can later turn it into a way to impair the opposing board to finish them off, for example, but in constructed this is not going to be good enough. Next we have Spear Spewer, the 1-mana 0/2 defender, and yeah, you can tap it to deal 1 damage to the enemy player, making this even borderline interesting in Standard for like a more burn-oriented mono red deck. There are probably too many better options for this to make it, but I've seen people on MTG Arena already messing around with this together with the wall from Guild of Ravnica and stuff, and just going for like a kind of stall and burn them out plan rather than the typical red deck wins attack and finish them off with burn spells. And this is definitely a solid option there, since it's effectively a 1 mana, 1/2 unblockable, so to speak. And next we have Spikewheel Acrobat, limited only card. Nothing too exciting in limited, but a 3 mana 5/2 is a pretty decent deal in limited, especially if you have ways to clear the path for it. And for 4 mana it's underwhelming, like Cobble Brute has been around for a while and has always been quite bad in limited, but the Spectacle makes this quite a bit better, since on turn 3 this is definitely a much better deal than on turn 4. So in limited this seems like a decent curve filler in an aggressive deck with enough 2-drops. Next we have Stormstrike, so basically I think, what's it called? Yeah, I don't remember the name of the normal version, but this is the same card except with Scry 1. I think it's like Kindle Strike or something. Like normally the card just gave +1/+0 and first strike, and now it also has Scry 1, making it a whole lot better. It's kind of like Titan Strength which was also quite a bit better because of the Scry 1, and this is arguably potentially even a bit better in limited, since the first strike is really strong and makes it much easier to not trade 2 for 1 compared to with like Titan Strength. Not a constructed card though, probably, unlike Titan Strength, which made it into some of these hyper aggressive heroic mono red decks that Tom Ross came up with. And last but not least, we have Tin Street Dodger, a 1 mana 1/1 haste. Probably outclassed in Standard by more better options. And yeah, Tin Street Dodger can't be blocked this turn except by creatures with Defender, so you can make it like pseudo unblockable for 1 mana, making it actually quite decent, even in Constructed technically, but we have too many better options I think in Standard for this to make it into a mono red aggressive deck. But in limited, if your deck is very aggressive, this might be good enough to enable Spectacle and kind of deal damage when you're stalled out and stuff like that. But in most limited decks this will be too weak and too low impact. You need like a really good Rakdos aggro, I think, for this to be a consideration. Okay, this rounds out the second half of the red cards. As usual, I'll be back tomorrow with the first half of the green cards. Hope you guys enjoying the series so far. As usual, let me know in the comments what you think about the reviews and where you disagree. Share it with your friends, hit the like button, and please consider whitelisting YouTube on your ad block to help support the content for free. That would really mean a lot. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the notification icon to not miss out on future content. That's it again for this time. I'm your host ManuS. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!